Good morning, Internet, and welcome back to the 4DQB show. I'm your humble host, LSL. If you're wondering why I have such a huge smile on my face, besides this being my first show of 2024, it's only a few weeks before the most anticipated day in all of sports, the NFL draft. And I get to talk about everything football, including this year's draft with, yes, the former GM and Vice President of Operations of the New York Jets, current ESPN analyst, professor of football business management, the inner workings of the NFL at Columbia University, as well as co-founder of the 33rd team in the NFL. What, you thought there were only 32? And I am so excited to introduce the man that Mike Francesca used to respectfully call Mr. T, who I will also call Mr. T during this interview. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mike Tannenbaum. Thank you for being here, Mr. T.
Thanks, Logan. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. Now, before we get started, let me answer the question that's probably on everyone's mind who's watching this. This is not an AI trick or fake image. This is the real Mike Tannenbaum. So I'm sure you're all wondering, how did I get Mr. T to come on my show? And I'll promise I'll reveal that secret a little later. But I know you all want to hear from Mr. T. So again, welcome, Mr. T. This is so cool. And I would love to get started and just jump right into it.
Great.
So let's go. Okay, I promise you, like I promised all my other guests, that this would not be a cookie cutter interview. And excuse me, I did a lot of research. I got a bunch of notes, so I'm going to be looking down. Out of respect to my viewers and to you, I've done a lot of research, and I'm in preparing for this interview since my dad helped me with this interview, preparing for this since I was 3 years old, because that's when you became the GM. I've not had a lot of sleep since we arranged this only 48 hours ago. I'll be looking at my cheat sheets. Are you ready, Mr. T?
Yes, sir.
So I want to take you first down a trip down GM memory lane to the year 2006, 18 years ago. By the way, does 2006, which was a monumental year in your career, feel like yesterday or a long time ago?
Great question. I'd say a little bit of both. I remember exactly where I was. I was on the side of a hill, not far from our house in Roslyn, Long Island, when I got the call from Woody Johnson about promoting me from assistant GM to GM. So, I know exactly where I was and remember the conversation vividly. And in other ways, 18 years is a long time.
Yeah, great. So the year is 2006. After 4 years of college at UMass, where you majored in sports management, and then another 4 years at Tulane to earn your law degree, you then paid your dues and then some for being an intern at the Saints in 94, to stints at Cleveland, to 1997 being hired by the legendary Bill Parcells, who ironically was a New York Giants Super Bowl champion head coach, who hired you for the player personnel department for the Jets, to culminating with you being the GM for the Jets at the young age of 37. So my not so obvious first question, and feel free to shed a tear, it'll be good for my ratings. Besides your wife and parents, who did you call to tell this amazing news to? And who is that one person that has such an influence in your life that, again, besides your wife and parents, you just could not wait to tell them?
Boy, that's a great question. I think it may have been my sister, but the person that really helped me get to where I wanted to go in the formative years of my career was a woman named Lisa Master Alexa. She at the time ran the UMass sports management program, and I had this dream that I wanted to work in sports. And I didn't have the confidence to do it. I had a lot of self-doubt of this is crazy. Can I really do this? And while I was an undergrad at UMass, she actually gave me the confidence to be you can do this. And I had done some projects for her, and just the feedback she had given me really was meaningful. And there were others, but she was one. And then one of my bosses at the Saints, a gentleman named Chet Franklin, he was another person that, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have had that opportunity.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So I would like to go through your amazing 2006 draft, which was your first draft as the man. No pressure, and then hopefully uniquely segue into some questions about the 2024 draft. You have the fourth pick in the draft coming off one of the greatest college football games of all time. It was the Rose Bowl between undefeated USC and undefeated Texas. USC featured Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart, and both Heisman Trophy winners, and Texas featured a QB who many would say was a man amongst boys and played the greatest game of quarterback in the history of college football. No brainer, can't miss. First round draft pick, Vince Young. How was my setup for this draft so far? Not bad. Um,
It's perfect.
cool. Thank you. So, first pick, number one pick in the draft was defensive end Mario Williams. The Texans had a good career, no Hall of Fame. Number two pick was Reggie Bush. Again, good career, no Hall of Fame. Number three pick, Vince Young. And calling Young an unfortunate eventual bust might be a polite way in describing his career. Then you had the number four pick, and you had no way of knowing this at the time, but you took a player who amazingly would play his entire 10-year career as the starting left tackle, never miss a game in those 10 years, 160 something games in a row, three Pro Bowls and a member of the Jets Ring of Honor. I am speaking of the great D. Brickashaw Ferguson. First question, with no disrespect to D. Brickashaw, did you try to move up? I mean, you were talking about possibly getting Reggie Bush or Vince Young, who at the time were considered absolute no-brainers, or were you content at number four? And then after that, tell me what made D. Brickashaw so special that you took him as your first pick ever as a GM? I mean, it's not like your first pick was going to be dissected and scrutinized every which way in the media capital of the world with the craziest and most intense fans ever. So in football, so very curious about that.
Yeah. So I think context is really helpful here. The year
Yeah.
before, we had lost two quarterbacks in 7 snaps, Chad Pennington and Jade Fiedler. And we really struggled on the offensive line. So when I got promoted to GM, and Terry Broadway was the gentleman I replaced, but Terry stayed. We still had a absolutely amazing relationship. We worked together for 18 years. We were talking about the team. And my whole point was like, look, I don't really care if John Elway's in this draft or fill in the bank, whatever great quarterback, because if we can't block Jason Taylor and Richard Seymour and all these other great players in our division, nothing else matters.
Hmm.
So I was really anchored in on getting the best offensive lineman we could have for. Now, Reggie Bush was someone, candidly, we would have considered if he was there at 4. The night before the draft started, actually, Mario Williams agreed to terms with the Texans. So that was a big curveball, Logan. So when Bush got to 2, we did have a conversation like, could he slide to 4? But I was really, really focused on we have to get our offensive line squared away.
Wow. That's pretty interesting with Mario. That's wow. By the way, I don't know or think that the average Jet fan realizes how amazing your first draft was. Your second pick at 29 was future 7-time Pro Bowler center Nick Mangold, who, like D. Brickashaw, spent his entire career as a Jet. He played 11 years as a starting center and is also a member of the Jets Ring of Honor, who should be in the Hall of Fame. And your third pick, Kellen Clemens, played 12 years in the NFL, mostly as a backup quarterback. Not too shabby, Mr. T. And you look back on your first draft. What are your thoughts and what are your fondest memories in the war room as it's happening?
Yeah, actually, something that really stuck with me was there was like 3 other players that we were looking at. D'Angelo Williams, he was a running back. Mercedes Lewis and Nick Mangold, and it just kind of fell like just the way we kind of had him on our board. I'll never forget this though. So we get Nick at 29, and as soon as we turn the pick, I get a call from Ozzie Newsome, who was the long-term GM of the Ravens, a guy I respect a lot. He's like, I cannot believe that you got Nick Mangold at 29. At 13, we had Haloti Ngata, we had Nick Mangold, and it was like 51-49 Haloti Ngata over Mangold. Like it was that close. And somehow it's one of those things, Logan. It's just that's the fun part about the draft. I
Yeah,
got almost taken at 13, was there at 29. And it's inexplicable. We were lucky, but boy, it was necessary. And Nick and Brick were great guys, great teammates, and gave us a great foundation.
I agree. I agree. Um, I want to say in 2006 and talk about for a moment Reggie Bush, the number 2 pick, and then number 3 pick Vince Young, segue to present day college football and the NFL draft, and get your perspective on what I think are important and interesting questions. First, Reggie Bush, without getting into the merits of the NCAA's decision, right or wrong, in 2010, Reggie Bush was stripped of his Heisman for allegedly taking about 200 grand from an agent. I should state for the record that Bush did file a lawsuit recently for a defamation to get his Heisman back. I do not believe a decision has been rendered yet, but let's juxtapose why Bush was stripped of his Heisman against the world of today's college NIL insanity. First, do you think Reggie Bush should get his Heisman back, considering that today's college players of his stature or less are receiving payments of literally $200,000 per game? Like, for example, like Arch Manning is getting $2.5 million. He didn't even play. So
Yeah,
I'm very curious what your thoughts on that are.
I think what we've seen, Logan, over time, like just from a big picture standpoint. And look, like to be candid, like I look at you like you have a vibrant career playing football at one of the best schools on the planet, and yet you're building a business, and that's great. Like you're hardworking. You've obviously been able to prioritize your time to do that, which I'm sure is really hard. I know you get support from your family, which is great.
Thank you.
But let's face it, like Logan, 5, 10 years ago, like you would lose eligibility, you'd be ostracized, and
Yeah.
like the world has changed in a material way. And I think like the old school sort of way was like, well, hey, like Division 1 athletes are getting an education, and that's worth in theory hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I think what we've seen over time is because the value of college sports has grown so exponentially that when you take a half a step back and say like, hey, Arch Manning, as you said, if he's getting $2.5 million, there's economic reasons for that. So if everyone's benefiting from that, from the coaching staff to the school, shouldn't the student athlete get some, piece of the pie? And over time, the answer to that is yes. And I think bootstrapping that sort of analysis to Reggie Bush, I do think like whatever transgression Reggie Bush had and whatever rule he broke, like I think like he's paid his dues, like he's quote unquote like served his sentence.
Yeah.
And I think the point's been made, and I think that trophy should be restored.
Great. Thank you. Uh, Second part to that question, considering the opinion of many others, this NIL system is not sustainable. What is your position? Like if you were Sarah Tannenbaum of college football and your word was law, would you, for the lack of better words, set a salary cap for colleges or something else? What would you do? Would you leave it alone? The genie's out of the bottle. I mean, how do you fix it?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, and look, this will certainly resonate with you, Logan. Like, I don't think, just to pick a school, Stanford's softball team is benefiting by playing the ACC. Like, that just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. So, do you sort of like extract, basketball and football and say, hey, let's just go up with like, the 40 best teams and come up with like a super league? Because let's face it, like, um, you know, say what we want, but like all these traditions, like the Big Ten and the SEC, are like the two that are going to survive. Like we're seeing, Clemson, Florida State trying to sue to get out of the ACC. So I think that era of like conference play is basically over. So I
Yeah.
think to me, I would take football and basketball out. I would come up with a number, Logan, somewhere between 30 and 40. And
Hmm.
I would that would be sort of like the basis of like call that like bucket one, and then bucket two would be everything else. And I would go back to traditional conference play that worked for 60, 70, whatever it is, years. Because I just don't think, if you look at these other crew and other things, like look, I know how hard you have to work to maintain a GPA at Princeton. Like that's
Yeah.
hard to do with all that travel.
Okay, now I want to talk about the third pick, Vince Young, and how that segues us to this year's 2024 draft. First, no pun intended, I don't want to hit a man while he's down, but after that Rose Bowl game, Vince, according to all accounts I can find online, was a no-brainer, guaranteed first quarterback pick in the 2006 draft, who was going to set the NFL on fire with his incredible talents, and there would be a good chance he'd become the GOAT. That we now know did not happen. Now, I do not see it, but I did not see it, but my dad saw you on Friday morning on Get Up debating with Greeny and Bart Scott about who you think should be the number one pick, quarterback Caleb Williams of USC or Jaden Daniels of LSU. I now know your choice is Williams. My first question is this. Since picking a quarterback is the hardest and most important position to draft, and because sports today is often ruled by analytics, Is there any new type of evaluation technology or data that you did not have access to in 2006 that GMs have access to now that can cut the odds of predicting a quarterback's potential, like what happened to Vince Young, so that it doesn't happen to, sure bets like Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels in 2024? I'm curious if anything's changed.
Yeah, great question. There is things where you can track player speed in game, like they have these chips on, so that helps because now you get away from the dogma of like combine information and combine measurements, which obviously they're helpful, but it's just like that information, like it's a little bit like what I would say like devalued because of the prep that players put into it. So I do like the fact that how fast they play in the game is helpful. And then a lot of it comes down to like intangibles, and there's ways to assess processing, recall. There's a lot of controversy around that too, but I do think some of those tests are helpful. But I think more fundamentally, Logan, it's still like those. None of those are like dispositive of how they're going to play. Like
Yeah.
it's all pieces of the puzzle. Um, so it's really one of those things where you want to get all the information, but I do believe in the tape sets the floor and the character sets the ceiling. And what I mean by that is it's like college recruiting. Like, when you weigh like, I don't know, would you weigh 110 pounds when you got to Princeton? Like they think you're going to get bigger, right? Like they think you're going to work hard, take protein shakes, and they're betting that you're going to work hard at your craft. Same thing at the NFL. Like Coach Belichick always used to like, pound two things to us. Like pro players are going to have more time and more money, and how are they going to take to those two things? And are they going to get better? Are they going to get coached? Are they going to work hard at their craft, or are they going to, not do that? So that's one of the things you spend a lot of time on. And I'm not saying like that's why Vince Young worked or didn't work. Like
Yeah.
there could be a million reasons why, but like we spend a lot of time on those intangibles.
Great. Um, during my research, I found an article from last year by Matt Zemek that points out that a USC player, other than a quarterback, has played in 48 out of the 57 Super Bowls. That's incredible. What is even more incredible, or maybe the word incredulous is more appropriate, that considering USC's storied history of great teams and players, including 8 Heisman Trophy winners in total, in which 2 were quarterbacks, Carson Palmer and Matt Leinart, and many other great USC quarterbacks, not one USC quarterback has ever won a Super Bowl, let alone played in one. So my two-part question is this: does a quarterback's college history or program, not his personal game history or play, have any impact whatsoever on your decision in picking a player back in 2006 or now if you were a GM? And
Yeah, it's a good
why?
question. Logan, that actually has come up. That's a really good question. People are asking that about Drake May because of the
Yeah.
recent history of Mitch Trubisky
Mhm.
and Sam Howell. So it's really interesting. I'd say this on the surface, not really, but if you want to take another level or two down and look at like, is the play caller the same? Is the offense the same? Because like to say like, well, USC quarterbacks don't work out, I think that's really too broad of a brush. And I think that would really be unfair to Caleb Williams. It'd also be like saying like, well, transfer quarterbacks don't work out. Like that was a different era. So I think on any of these things, like context is everything. Like you want all the information and then put all the pieces of the puzzle together.
Hmm. Yeah. Though I do have some other questions about preparing for the draft and especially the art of the trade, which is the name of a book I think you should write on a segment or ESPN. I know you are getting ready for ESPN's draft day broadcast, and I want to be respectful and not ask you too many questions and give away the store. But I think asking this one is okay. Who is your 2024 Brock Purdy? Who is the one player this year as a GM you hope nobody drafts that you could pick up in a very later round, 6 or 7, say as your own Mr. Irrelevant, kind of like a later Nick Mangold steal. Like, how is this guy still available at 29? But in a later round, maybe if you thought of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Probably Michael Pratt from Tulane. I think he's a guy that all these other guys are getting the headlines. Penix, Caleb, which they all deserve. Look. I went to Tulane for law school. It's a great program. What those kids did there with Tajay Spears, like they beat USC 2 years ago in the Cotton Bowl. Coach Fritz did an amazing job. And I think, part of what you're trying to measure is greatness, and greatness as it relates to like how you like. I always had concerns about Eli Manning. I never thought like he made Ole Miss like transformational when he was there. You look at Tulane, not to say that Michael Pratt's gonna be better than Eli, but my point is like he helped transform a program that was really moribund for decades. And to me, like there's something in him that's special. Like if you cut him in half, like what's going to ooze out of him has to be toughness and resilience and competitiveness, and you want to fill your roster with that.
I love that. I love that. I think this is a great time to go back further than 2006 when little Mr. T was running around the bases and gridiron in Needham, Massachusetts. Tell me your sports, at what your sports were, your positions you played, and who your favorite teams and players were.
So it's really the formative years of my career, of my life. Grew up in Needham, Mass. My sister was 3 years older. When she left for college, I had more of a, I'd say like intimate relationship with my parents just because I spent more time with them. I was the only one in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And, my dad was an electrical engineer. He worked in transit. I don't think he ever like loved his job. And I played football and basketball. Candidly, I was a better basketball player than I was football. I was decent, but not great. And I was really influenced, actually, Logan, by the late great Red Auerbach. He was the GM and head coach of Celtics for forever, like one of the most like legendary coaches. And there's just something about it that like just resonated with me. He made this trade in the 1980 draft. He traded Joe Barry Carroll. He got basically went from like the first pick to the third pick for Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale. He traded Gerald Henderson, what turned out to be the second pick, Glenn Bias, who unfortunately passed. But I'm watching all this in the formative years. I'm like, that's what I want to do. Like, I don't want to do what my dad's doing. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And that's really like where it all started for me. But I love playing basketball. I like football. And then it was all about like, I want to be Red Auerbach.
Nice. So, who was your high school long snapper?
Yeah, Logan, I don't think I remember who our long snapper was.
Uh-oh. I asked that question to all my interviewees. You know, remember? Okay. Well, if hopefully he's not watching this, whoever it was. Um,